Africa, a continent filled with wonder, amazing beauty, and distinct cultures. But in Africa, there is also darkness, hopelessness, deadly disease, unceasing hardship, and utter poverty. In the nation of Kenya, churches and Christian organizations have been working for years to bring people the gospel of Jesus Christ. But in the very remote areas of Kenya, there are still many groups of people who have been unreached with the gospel message. Many of these groups follow spirit worship, cult teachings, and false doctrines. The deadly disease of AIDS leaves many women widowed and numerous children as orphans, lost and alone, struggling to find a place in life or even to eat one meal each day. Independent Church in India is a ministry that is dedicated to preaching the gospel to the unreached and reaching out to those in the most desperate need. The Lord has broadened our vision and connected us with a ministry called Freedom and Truth Ministry. In the nation of Kenya, Freedom and Truth Ministries shares the very same goals and calling as ICII, reaching out to those who are still unreached with the gospel. Our partnership together is to reach into all the different nations of Africa with the message of Jesus Christ, and to help the poor and disabled, the orphans, the AIDS victims, widows, and more. The leader of Freedom and Truth Ministries is a humble man of God named Pastor Calvin Osonglo. He is well acquainted with the hopelessness and lonely lives of the street children of Kenya. Pastor Calvins grew up as an orphan, abandoned and homeless on the streets for 10 long years. Calvins' own childhood was full of rejection, pain, and utter poverty. But through his amazing life story, the Lord has formed in him the compassionate, Christ-like character that makes him so effective in reaching the Kenyan people for Jesus. Here is Pastor Calvins' heart-wrenching testimony.
I was born in a village known as Kangoje. My father died when I was 3 years old. When he died, my mother was pregnant with my sister. We started to face a very rough life. So my mother ended up becoming a prostitute, only so she could get my sister and myself one meal each day. After 5 years of this kind of life, my mother died as a result of AIDS. At the age of 9, I started life as an orphan with my younger sister. After the death of my both parents, my sister and I were violently chased out of our area by relatives that did not want to take responsibility for us. And we started to live and sleep in drainage trenches and tunnels. I became a beggar for food, going to every house. I suffered greatly because my sister and I had to struggle with going to school. As time went on, I worked as a slave for my uncle, as he forced me to be a brick maker, so my sister and I could get a small portion to eat. Also, I would look for food that people gave to dogs, and from digging through the garbage remains. As I got older, I had no option but to join the street gangs of other homeless and neglected youths. I longed for acceptance in the gangs, just so I and my sister could survive by collecting and living on garbage. But this life was also filled with a lot of pain and suffering. When I was 16 years old, a pastor found me as I was collecting food from the garbage for our next meal. His name was Rashid, who had been a Muslim converted to Christianity. He tried to share the gospel of Christ with me, but I did not want to listen to him, for I was wondering where this God was when my parents died, and when I had been suffering without food, clothes, and had to sleep in the trenches and tunnels. I was feeling rejected and forsaken by everyone, including God, in this world. After 1 week, this pastor came again and began to share again. At that time, I came to the knowledge of Christ and accepted Jesus as my Lord and Savior. After this, struggle I faced became even more rough and hard in my life. At the age of 18, God spoke to me 4 times while praying and through visions that He wants me to become a minister to my fellow street children. From there, I started to preach to the youth on the streets and orphans whom had, like me, lost all hope in life. Because of these good works, a well-wisher helped me to find a place to live, and eventually I got the chance to go to Bible school and become a pastor.
Since then, Pastor Calvins and his team of gospel workers have been reaching the remote villages of Kenya on foot. They walk by faith each day, and God's love motivates them to share His salvation plan with the lost and dying in Kenya. Having no money, many times Pastor Calvins has had to walk as far as 25 miles at a time to get to an unreached village. He would then preach for several days in the area before having to walk back again through the jungle hills in the steaming heat. Often, he could only eat if a compassionate believer would share a meal with him. To Pastor Calvins and the Freedom and Truth Gospel team, this is a small price to pay in order to bring Christ's love to these unreached people.
I also feel called to reach many in very remote interior villages, and it's not easy to get a means of transportation to reach those villages. But we have many souls whom have not heard about Jesus Christ. They are still unreached, but they are in remote villages where I need God's provision, at least to have a means of transportation to those villages to help me reach them and share the good news with them.
The Lord is working powerfully through Pastor Calvins and his gospel team, bringing many people to the Lord, healing the sick. Many young people are trusting in the Lord because they know about His past life. While there are churches in the towns and cities in Kenya, the very remote areas still have few. The uniqueness of Pastor Calvins' ministry is his willingness to go into the hills and bush regions, on foot if necessary, to share the gospel, minister to the poor and needy, plant churches, start Bible studies and children's ministry in the most remote areas. His goal is to raise up pastors and missionaries to lead these churches and evangelize in their own areas. Pastor Calvins and his team were willing to obey God and go out into the hills where no other ministry would go. And God has now established 7 church plants in these little reached places where the souls He had won to Christ are being discipled in the truth of God's life-changing Word. The pastors whom God has raised up to lead these new churches also have many struggles. Pastoring the churches and doing evangelism in the remote areas is very hard work. On top of this, all the pastors are left with the responsibility of caring for orphans who have lost parents due to AIDS. Many of these orphans are also infected with HIV, and they have many needs. All the pastors live by faith day to day for the next meal for their families and also the orphans that share their small mud huts. ICII wants to help these pastors so they can bear even more fruit in the nation of Kenya. You can sponsor a native missionary in Kenya for a one-time gift of only $360 for a whole year, or for a commitment of only $30 per month. Your gift will help to provide for the physical needs of a missionary and his family, and the needs of the many orphans living with them. Your gift will also help to provide Bibles, gospel tracts, and Bible study materials. For a gift of $1,250, you can provide a motorbike for a missionary so he can travel to remote areas, bringing the glorious gospel of Jesus Christ to these desperate and unreached people groups in the nation of Kenya. In Kenya, many orphans have been totally abandoned, forced to live on the streets, eating from the garbage. Kids of all ages struggle each day without any hope, feeling unwanted, unloved, and without purpose in life. Just think if this was your child. These children are living, breathing, feeling people just like you and me. Will you help them before it's too late? Your help will provide food, clothing, shelter, school expenses, and medical needs. Your support will also help widows, often with many children, who are left to struggle each day for even one meal. Will you allow your heart to reach out in the love of Jesus to these hurting and hopeless people in the nation of Kenya? Your support will accomplish so much by helping to change one life at a time for all eternity.